Dr. Vishweshwaran Balasubramanian. I am currently working as a consultant interventional pulmonology and sleep medicine specialist at Yashoda Hospitals, Malakpet in Hyderabad. So the topic today I will be presenting to you is about central airway obstruction and the role of bronchoscopy. This is a topic which both of us share, and I feel it is a right platform where we can share our experiences and maybe we can take it to the next level. So when do we really call it as a central airway obstruction? So the central airway obstruction can be because of malignant process. It can be because of any sort of a mechanical process or an obstructive process that impedes the airflow within the central airways. So the central airways are the trachea, the mainstem bronchi, and the right bronchus intermedius. So if any of these three segments, if you have any sort of an obstruction because of malignancy or even because of benign causes, we call it as a central airway obstruction. But when it comes to the malignant central airway obstruction, the most important point is like 20 to 30% of the patients with lung cancer will develop complications associated with central airway obstruction. So it can be in the form of a localized atelectasis. It can be in the form of a post-obstructive pneumonia. Patient may come to you with hemoptysis, or patient may come to you with irretractable cough or dyspnea, etc. And as high as 40% of the lung cancer deaths are attributed to locoregional disease. That means that if you are going to debulk this tumor in the central airway, probably you are going to do a better palliative care for this patient, thereby decreasing the symptom burden as long as the patient survives. So as I said previously, the central airway obstruction can be classified into malignant, which can be a primary, like for example, a bronchogenic carcinoma arising from the trachea, or it can be because of a metastatic, like the most common being the lung, the breast, the colorectal, and the renal malignancies. Or it can be because of an extrinsic compression or a direct invasion of the adjoining intrathoracic malignancy. Like for example, you have a lymphoma which compresses your trachea or the bronchi, or you have got a thyroid carcinoma which compresses your trachea. And the other causes being the non-malignant. So the non-malignant causes are very common, though most of us relate central malignant cause. We have seen the pandemic of COVID and many patients landing up requiring tracheostomy or endotracheal intubation for a long period of time. So when these patients report to you with complaints of breathlessness, most of us in a busy practice tend to ignore this symptom or attribute this symptom of breathlessness to just post-COVID fibrosis. But probably this patient, when you seriously look into their CT scan or the PFT, or if you do a bronchoscopy, probably you can pick up multiple cases of post-intubation tracheal stenosis or post-tracheostomy tracheal stenosis, which really contribute to this breathlessness. And the point to be noted is not all stenosis of the airway actually require a tracheostomy. We have had many patients who are on tracheostomy, and when we did bronchoscopy and we found that there is an element of post-intubation or post-tracheostomy tracheal stenosis, we just did a rigid bronchoscopic with a balloon dilatation and plus or minus silicone stenting, and these patients return back to their normal state even without tracheostomy. So especially during this time of a COVID pandemic, always remember when a patient of COVID discharge comes to you with breathlessness, do consider the possibility of a post-intubation tracheal stenosis or a post-tracheostomy tracheal stenosis, because it is very, very common. In addition to this, there can be a mediastinal lymph node compression. Like in India, we have always mediastinal fibrosis secondary to tuberculosis or sarcoidosis, or you can have a subglottic web because of vaginous granulomatosis. You can have an aberrant artery compressing the trachea, or endotracheal tube or a tracheostomy tube granulation, or in case of a previous patient who is stented, or in a child who complains to you with a localized collapse of the lung or hyperlucent airway, probably you may be having a foreign body material, or sometimes in a post-transplant, you can have a surgical anastomosis, stenosis, or it can be in the form of amyloidosis, papillomatosis, or hamartomas, or very rarely that central airway obstruction can be caused by tracheobronchomalacia or an excessive dynamic airway collapse, and it can be caused by goiter, and the list goes on. So central airway obstruction does not mean only malignancy. It can be even because of a lot of benign causes. And when we take the types of the central airway obstruction, we broadly divide it into three major types. One being an endoluminal obstruction. As you can see from the picture, there is only a component which is inside the lumen. or it can be an extrinsic compression where it is compressing it from outside like an esophageal cancer, or it can be mixture of both where the tumor starts from the bronchogenic and it extends inside as well as outside. Understanding this is very important because in case of an endoluminal obstruction, simple debulking of this obstruction is sufficient. But when you have an extra mural compression, then probably just a stenting would be sufficient. But when you have a mixture of both, then probably you need to debulk this tumor, and the patient may require a part of a stenting to prevent the further progression of the compression from the tumor. And when do you really call the central airway obstruction to be a significant obstruction? Are we going to debulk all cases of central airway obstruction? The answer is definitely no. So we call it a central airway obstruction to be significant only when the endoluminal diameter is less than 50% of the normal. But the point to be noted is it does not require that the diameter should be less than 8 millimeter at rest to produce symptom or less than 5 millimeter to produce symptom. It entirely depends upon the patient. For example, the acuity of obstruction. For example, if you suddenly inhale, aspirate a foreign body, probably your symptoms will be much more. Or if you have a patient who has got an underlying lung disorders like a post-TB cavity or a COPD, even a small amount of obstruction can cause dyspnea in these patients. But for all theoretical purposes, we will start debulking a tumor if the endoluminal diameter caused by the obstruction is more than 50%. The point to be noted is most of these cases of central airway obstruction present with symptoms which are pretty common with any other thing. Cough, breathlessness, wheeze, plus or minus hemoptysis. This can be seen in case of a tuberculosis. This can be seen in case of an asthma. This can be seen in case of a COPD. But the presence of a hemoptysis might be more specific marker that the patient is having some sort of a malignant process or an intraluminal growth. But for all other aspects are similar to that of other respiratory problems. So that is why you need to have very high index of suspicion. When you treat a patient of an asthma or a COPD, or you feel that the patient is not responding to your treatment, then probably this patient could be a candidate for a central airway obstruction. The degree of symptoms also depends upon the location and the rate of progression in airway obstruction. It depends upon the underlying health status. As I said, that a patient who has an underlying COPD or a post-TB cavity, probably they present with symptoms much earlier than a patient who has got a relatively normal lung. The symptoms might also be because of post-obstructive sequelae. For example, the patient may present to you with fever because he could have had an element of post-obstructive pneumonitis, or patient can present to you with other rare infections like a fungal infections because this obstructive pneumonia might be the focus for these fungal infections, or patient can even present to you with a lot of cavitations secondary to the post-obstructive pneumonia. So your symptoms might be masqueraded by the presence of a post-obstructive sequelae. And mostly these are misdiagnosed as exacerbations of a COPD or an asthma. So that is when you feel that the patient is not responding as expected for a treatment, then probably you need to have a suspicion of a central airway obstruction. And a partial improvement or a persistence of symptoms despite treatment, look for central airway obstruction. Anatomically fixed obstruction are generally unresponsive to the bronchodilators. And presence of a unilateral wheezing might suggest a focal airway obstruction like a foreign body, and presence of the stridor might suggest a severe laryngeal or a tracheal obstruction. And presence of a positional wheezing or an exertional dyspnea is very characteristic of a extraluminal compression of the trachea by means of cancer of thyroid or cancer of esophagus. But the problem is neither your chest X-ray nor your PFT is specific. So that cannot be the modality of choice. So the modality of the choice still remains the HRCT with a multi-dose CT scan. So this will give you position about the idea about the location, the extent of the obstruction, what is the distal lung segment status, what you need to plan, and it helps in ruling out other diagnoses. In addition, your CT scan can help you to make a virtual bronchoscopy. Thereby, you will know whether the part distal to the obstruction is viable or not. But having said that, even your CT is not 100% specific. So there comes the role of your fiber optic bronchoscopy, which is used to find out the nature and the extent of obstruction. It helps in planning treatment information like the relative amount of intraluminal and extraluminal disease, and it allows a tissue diagnosis so that you can characterize whether you are dealing with a case of a malignant obstruction or a benign obstruction, because the pattern of the stenting depends upon the etiology of the obstruction. So this is a X-ray which I present to you. Until and unless I arrow it and put it to you, for most of us, it is a case of a normal chest X-ray. But only when you get a CT scan, you know that there is a big tumor sitting inside the trachea at the level of the carina causing the breathing problem. And with your mediastinal window, you can find out that this is not only an intrinsic growth, there is also a component of a extraluminal growth. So this is how your CT will really help you in picking up cases of central airway obstruction. So when we move on to the bronchoscopy in central airway obstruction, the advantages of the bronchoscopy are, these are the gold standard in assessing the morphology and the degree of central airway obstruction, and it helps to biopsy the lesion. Let's say, for example, I am biopsying the lesion and it turns out to be a small cell lung cancer. And most of the small cell lung cancer respond extremely well when you put these patients on chemotherapy or plus or minus radiotherapy. So in such cases, I may not even stent these patients because I know that once I put this patient on a chemotherapy, the patient will show a significant response. But having said that, the bronchoscopy being the gold standard, one point to notice, most of these patients who come to you with central airway obstructions are extremely fragile. That means they may have an obstruction which is almost causing 80% of the obstruction of the lumen. And when you do bronchoscopy, if you induce a bleeding or an edema, it may change a stable airway into an emergency airway. So never take these bronchoscopies lightly, and always do these bronchoscopies having a backup, because while doing a bronchoscopy also, if a patient coughs or if you touch their growth and it causes edema or bleeding, probably you may convert a stable airway into an emergent airway, and that might turn out to be risky for the patient. And use of sedatives, particularly neuromuscular block, should be avoided because it has got a potential to induce complete airway obstruction because of the loss of the respiratory muscle tone. And moving on to the therapeutic aspects of the central airway obstruction, when are we really going to do the therapeutic aspect? One, when you have got an intrinsic obstruction or an extrinsic obstruction, or both in case of malignant disease, in case of tracheobronchial bleeding, in case of tracheoesophageal or bronchopleural fistula, or a complex foreign body extraction. And are we going to choose all patients for debulking in case of malignant airway obstruction? No. You will do it only depending upon these predictors of failure. When there is a high incidence of left mainstem bronchial obstruction, or a mucosal infiltration of tumor, or high anesthesia score risk, or renal failure, primary lung cancer, presence of tracheoesophageal fistula, generally the outcomes are poor. But having said that, we have even done for such patients, and these patients have also shown a significant response. But for a novice, it is better to avoid these patients because probably you are dealing with a more complex airway. So when are we going to really intervene? We will intervene with the aim of relieving the dyspnea, or it becomes a bridge to a definite therapy like a radiation or surgical resection. And in the absence of symptoms, even though they have a central airway obstruction, do not intervene. And for patients who are critically ill, such debulking or stenting might help in rapid extubation and de-escalation of care and long-term survival. So I will not be boring you with much of the lectures. What I am going to show you is the few interesting cases which we had, and each case teaches us something new, and that is what we are going to learn. So we have got a third, this is a real case. All these cases are real case scenarios whom I treated personally. So she's a 35-year-old female, and she complained to us with the complaints of breathlessness with an MMRC of grade 4, cough, loss of weight, and loss of appetite for 3 months. So when I did a CT scan, all that you can see is there is a presence of a big tumor sitting at the distal end of the trachea, almost causing a near complete occlusion of the trachea. And when we did the bronchoscopic image, you can see that there is a presence of a bilobed polypoid mass arising from the base of the trachea. And this is the video which shows what we really did. So when we did a bronchoscopy, as you can see from the picture, we are seeing a highly vascular polypoid growth, and this patient was almost in severe breathlessness and might have required intubation if we have delayed further. And we did the bronchoscope, the distal lung segments are normal, and the base of the tumor is extending up to the right main bronchus. So this is an extensive tumor which starts from the base of the right main bronchus and extends all up to the middle of the trachea. So this is what we really do. We took the patient under general anesthesia under rigid bronchoscopic intubation. And as you can see from here, we are passing an electrocautery snare around the base of the tumor. And we are trying to cut the tumor into two halves because we know that such a big tumor cannot be removed en bloc. And what we are using here is nothing but a cryoprobe, which helps in getting adhered to this cut piece of the tumor, and we are removing the tumor en bloc. And after we remove the tumor en bloc, we are taking the second section of the, we are removing the second portion of the tumor, again using an electrocautery snare. And this is the second piece which we have debulked from the trachea. So once it is debulked, in the coming video, you'll see there is a lot of bleeding because it's a vascular tumor. So what we use something called as an argon plasma coagulation, and we try to control the areas where it is bleeding. So this is what is an APC. It is a non-contact mode of achieving a hemostasis. And after that also, we are using an adrenaline soaked gauze to occlude the segment from where it is bleeding with the help of a rigid bronchoscopic forceps. And in addition to this, we are using a Fogarty balloon tamponade to occlude the bleeding. The point to be noted is the lung bleedings are very severe because even 50 ml can cause the death of the patient. So we are using the rigid bronchoscopy as a conduit to cause to core the rest of the remnants of the tumor from the trachea and from the right main bronchus. So this is a coring which we are doing with the help of a rigid bronchoscope, as you can see from the picture. So we have cored out the tumor, and what we are doing is the cryoablation of the remnant tumors which are left behind at the base of the resected portion. So once it is done, again we are using an APC to attain local site hemostasis. And this is the excuse me, trachea once the tumor is completely removed, and we have achieved a 100% luminal patency, and the patient was extubated on table. And as you can see from the next video, so, okay, we have removed the, we achieved the 100% luminal patency and the patient was extubated on table. So this is a X-ray that was done following the debulking with a complete luminized airway, and the diagnosis what we got was a adenoid cystic carcinoma. In this case, we do not require stenting because the patient had a pure endoluminal growth, and all that we required was a debulking. And this is the status of the patient immediately following the procedure. Within 4 hours of the procedure, the patient was able to walk, and the patient was discharged on the next day morning. So that was a case of a adenoid cystic carcinoma presenting with imminent airway obstruction. Similarly, we had another case who is a 60-year-old male, and he has got a history of hypothyroidism, and he has got a history of carcinoma of the left vocal cord with a partial laryngectomy done, with a neck node dissection done, and radiotherapy 6 years back. This time he presented to us with complaints of breathlessness and cough, which wasn't following vigorous bouts of cough with audible stridor with impending respiratory failure. So when we did the CT scan, as you can see from the picture, there is a presence of an intraluminal growth. In addition to this, there is a presence of an extraluminal growth with the destruction of the tracheal cartilage. And these sections, sagittal sections, can also give the idea about the lumen of the airway. As you can see, almost 80 to 90% of the lumen of the airway are compromised. So here we had few technical challenges because the patient has got an already partial laryngectomy done. The entire anatomy of the airway got distorted. So these are the cases of difficult airway intubation. For example, I'm intubating with a rigid bronchoscope. You can see from here, the total airway is totally distorted. You will not be able to say which is the vocal cord, where is the opening. But still, we were able to intubate with the help of a rigid bronchoscope. That is what we are doing here. We try to localize the anatomy of the epiglottis and the uvula, and then we are seeing the glottic inlet. And here we are rotating the rigid barrel of the rigid bronchoscope, and we are intubating into the trachea. So once we intubated into the trachea, you can see there is a thick vascular tumor almost causing 80 to 90% of the obstruction of the mainstem bronchus. So what we are doing is we are placing a suction catheter distal to the tumor so that in case if it bleeds, it will prevent the lung from flooding. And we are keeping a Fogarty balloon to cause an occlusion to protect this segment from the bleeding because we are dealing with the main airway. And after that, we are using an electrocautery snare. And this is an electrocautery snare. We are applying it, and we are removing this portion with the help of a cryoprobe, which I have shown you already. But here there was an interesting case because this tumor has eroded the cartilage and it has come inside. You are not able to maintain the plane of the dissection. So what we are doing is to remove the remnant of the tumor, we are going to do the rigid bronchoscopic coring. So while doing the rigid bronchoscopic coring, you can see that a portion of the cartilage is also cut. So now you will see a portion of a cartilage which has got eroded by the tumor is also cut during the process of a rigid coring with the barrel of the rigid bronchoscope. This is a portion of a cartilage which we are cutting. You can see from here. Can you see? Like we are removing the entire cartilage which is eroding into the trachea. with the help of a bevel of the rigid bronchoscope. So once it is done, now we know that this is the cartilage that is broken. And once it is done, now you can see that almost, since it is terminal and patency of the airway with the help of a self-expanding metallic tracheal stent, and 100% airway lumen is achieved. And this is how it looks once the metallic airway stent is put in place. So this is a post-procedure X-ray. The lungs are totally normal and the patient is extubated on table. And this is the radio-opaque metallic stent which has been put inside the airway. So that turned out to be a case of a squamous cell carcinoma with a recurrence. And this is a case 3. She is a 38-year-old female who presented to us with SVC syndrome with a suspicion of fibrosing mediastinitis with a massive pericardial effusion and respiratory distress. And the patient was referred here for evaluation and stenting. So these are very, very tricky cases because as you can see from here, the patient has got an extremely narrow trachea and there is extensive mediastinal fibrosis, and all these things what you see are nothing but collaterals because of SVC syndrome caused by the compression on the SVC. And the tracheal lumen is almost 90% obstruction can be seen. So this is what we did. We went inside. And as you can see from here, there is a total narrowing, total extrinsic compression from the outside, and it is almost involving even the carina. And you can see from here, you can see an extremely vascular tumor sitting at the base of the carina. So in such cases, taking a biopsy would be really deadly because once it stops bleeding, you will lose the patient on table. So what we did was we took this patient for an first EBUS to diagnose, because the patient had a mediastinal lymph node. We took an EBUS, and this is the needle that is going into the lymph node in the endobronchial ultrasound, and this gave us the diagnosis of a adenocarcinoma. So once we know that we are dealing with a malignant tumor, then our point is to do a palliation. So we introduced the CRE balloon and we tried to dilate, but the stenosis was so hard that we are not able to dilate the airway. So what we did was we wanted to debulk the tumor that is present at the level of the carina. So here we are using an electrocautery, and through this electrocautery, we are debulking the tumor that is present at the level of the carina. As you can see from here, we are using the electrocautery to cut the tumor that is present at the level of the carina to prevent any further bleeding. And once it is done, once we are using the electrocautery tip to ablate whatever the tumor remnants that are present in and around the carina. You can see that we have ablated the tumor that was present at the base of the carina. And after that, here we have introduced a silicone Y stent. So any tumor that involves the carina, we always go for a silicone Y. So sorry, we go for a metallic Y. So this is a self-expanding metallic Y stent. So this is used as a palliative in patients who present to us with a tumor at the level of the carina. And this was a case 4. She was an 80-year-old female with cough for 3 months, loss of appetite and loss of weight. And the right FOB showed a near complete occlusion of the right main bronchus with the origin of tumor in the right upper lobe. So as you can see from here, there is a near total occlusion of the right main bronchus along with the right upper lobe. And here, even taking a mild amount of biopsy would have been risky because if it has bled, it would have bled into the opposite side. So we are placing a suction catheter on the left main bronchus to prevent the spillover of the blood into the left bronchus and the lung. Then as you can see from here, we are passing an electrocautery snare and we are trying to snare out a tumor, but these are not a good snareable tumors because they don't have a pedicular, they do not have a base. So then we are using a cryo to cause a cryo extraction of the tumor. As you can see from here, we are trying to recanalize the airway, and then we are trying to core the right main bronchus. And once it is cored, we are using the cryo extraction of the remnants. And right now we have attained the complete recanalization of the right main bronchus, and the patient was extubated on table, and the patient was discharged the next day. Here we had a very, very rare diagnosis. This intrabronchial growth turned out to be a diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, which is extremely rare to have a primary in the main bronchus. And then we had a case of a 40-year-old male who was a non-smoker. As you can see from here, the patient presented to us with almost pinhole trachea with extreme stenosis with almost 90 to 100% occlusion of the main trachea. So this is what we did. So this is the pre-procedure. The patient had audible stridor with the use of accessory muscles of respiration. And so once we went inside, all that we could see was an extremely stenosed airway. So then what we did was we did a serial balloon dilatation. Here we are putting the controlled radial expansion balloon, which we call it as the CRE balloon, to increase the luminal size of the trachea. The balloon is being inflated. And once it is done, we are doing a rigid bronchoscopic coring and dilation. So this is what we are doing. We are trying to remove the tumor using a rigid bronchoscopic coring and dilation. And we are removing the intraluminal portion of the tumor. This is the tumor that is being removed during the time of the coring, and we are trying to extract the pieces with the help of a cryoprobe. So once it is done, as you can see, some remnants are there, and we have completely recanalized tracheal lumen. And this is one of the most complicated procedures, because what we are going to do is we are going to put something called as a silicon wise stent. Since we don't know the pathological diagnosis, in case if it is a benign tumor, then putting a metallic stent will worsen the situation. So what we are doing is we are putting something called as a silicon metallic stents. These silicon metallics advantages, like even when you want to remove, you can safely remove it. So here is how we are positioning the silicon wise stents here. So once the silicon wise stent is placed, the entire trachea is completely recanalized, and there is both the lungs are totally normal, and the patient is extubated on table. And this is the post-procedure patient status without any sort of dyspnea. And even now the patient is on follow-up without any complications. And this is how the X-ray looks post-procedure, and the diagnosis came out to be a adenoid cystic carcinoma. So these are the few cases of a malignant or benign to malignant central airway obstructions. But the most important cases, what I am going to deal now, are the benign causes of central airway obstruction. So he was a 50-year-old male patient, and he was on ECMO with us. And as you can see from here, when we went inside the trachea, all that you could see was a massive clot, and the patient had hemopsis, and there is a massive clot sitting on the left main bronchus. And the patient was desaturating despite being on ECMO. So here comes the role of a cryoprobe. So what we do is we tried to suction it, but we could not suction it. So we are introducing a cryoprobe. The cryo has got a very good affinity for the blood, because the blood contains a lot of water. So it makes it into an ice crystal. And as you can see from here, we are removing the entire clot en bloc. And now the entire lumen is canalized, and we are removing the remnant portions of the blood clot using a smaller probe, cryoprobe. And once it is done, the entire trachea is recanalized, and the patient bleeding has completely stopped. And this is how the blood clot that you will see once the blood clot is totally cryo extracted. And these are the few cases which both of us would share, like an ENT and a pulmonary community. Like a case, a 13-year-old boy, he presented to us with a right lower lobe collapse. And as you can see from here, there's some element of air trapping also. And once we went inside, we were able to see a pen cap which got stuck firmly. So we used a Dormia basket, and then we recanalized the airway, and this is the piece that was taken following the procedure. And this is a very, very interesting case, because it is a sort of an atypical foreign body. He was a 40-year-old male, and he was a smoker. He presented to us with a pneumomediastinum. As you can see from here, there is a presence of pneumomediastinum. But generally in pneumomediastinum, you tend to see that portion of the lung being hyperinflated. But on the contrary, the patient has got a collapse. So this triggered the suspicion. So we went for a CT scan that showed a presence of a calcific mass. And when we went inside the bronchos, through the bronchoscopy, what we were able to see was a thick piece of a calcium. Actually, he has aspirated a calcium pill. The problem with these pills are that they imbibe water. So when they imbibe water, initially the patient will be asymptomatic, but in due course of time, they imbibe more and more water and initiate a tissue reaction. These are very difficult sorts of a foreign body to remove. So that's why we are using a cryoprobe, and we are removing piecemeal. And this is the lumen that was attained at the end of the procedure. And as you can see from the picture, the pneumomediastinum has totally resolved, and even the lung has totally expanded. This turned out to be a pill aspiration. And as I said to you previously, during the times of the COVID, we see a lot of patients of COVID coming to us with breathlessness. Always remember that there is a possibility of a post-intubation or a post-tracheostomy, tracheal stenosis. So this patient had stridor, and in some other hospital, they wanted to do a tracheostomy. So they came to us. We saw there is a presence of a stenosis. So we did a rigid bronchoscopic dilation. and following the CRE balloon dilation and the rigid bronchoscopic dilation, the entire lumen was recanalized. So the patient did not require any further utility of any tracheostomy or other procedures. So I will leave it at that point of time. Like if there are any questions, I can take it. And this is my contact number and mail. If you have any doubts or anything related to the bronchoscopic aspects of central airway obstruction, feel free to share your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Those are very beautiful and very interesting cases. So I open up the session for a Q&A session. Any of the audience would like to interact?
Hello?
Yeah, Dr. Ramasubramaniam, can you?
Yes, madam, sir. I have been working as a ENT professor in a pediatric hospital for the past 18 years. I have got some doubts about that forgotten foreign bodies in children. Pediatric endoscopy, pediatric bronchoscopy is little difficult and complicated, but a forgotten foreign bodies, they have been treating for the COX and they have been treating for about 6 months. When I passed the bronchoscopy, it is full of granulation. Whether it's a foreign body or something else, a Mantoux was negative. But how did they did the anti-tuberculosis treatment? I don't know. They have taken in some village or something like that. But how to do that? And the child was around 5 years old boy. 5-year-old boy. He has been under treatment for the past 1 year. No improvement.
So this is a very tricky case, sir. We have had such cases. So what we do is we take this patient on a rigid bronchoscope, and first we go inside the.
What is the number? 3.5 or 4.5? 4.
Sir, we use the Karl Stoss 3.5, sir.
3.5 will be okay, sir. I did only 3.5. Even 4 can go.
Yeah, you can put that, sir. Then after that, we have got a pediatric bronchoscope. We have the P190 series in the Olympus, which is a pediatric bronchoscope. So you can, if it is a 5-year-old, you can easily do it, or even you can do such cases even under LMA or endotracheal intubation also, sir. Because it is, as per your comment, it looks like a distal obstruction, not in the main trachea. So what you have to do is...
It's not in the main trachea.
Pardon, sir?
It's not in the main trachea.
Yeah, that's what. Then in that case, you can even, in that case, you can even put a endotracheal intubation, or you can even put a LMA and then go inside. Just to look at that portion. What we have to do right now, since we have very high suspicion of a foreign body along with granulation tissue, we need to slowly remove the granulation tissue using a cryoprobe.
If I touch it, it starts oozing, bleeding, oozing, bleeding.
So that is the problem. So what we have to do is first we have to give some local adrenaline. Along with that, we need to give some steroids to decrease the edema. And once we do that, then we need to take the cryoprobe and slowly remove. And after each removal, you need to inflate the Fogarty to keep the hemostasis. So when you gradually remove this granulation tissue, you will be able to see that foreign body. This we have done prior also, but it's a very tedious process. And only thing is...
I did 2 times bronchoscopy. I couldn't go down.
No, that's what I'm saying.
The granulation was giving me so much trouble. I abandoned the procedure 2 times. Now I am asking for that. I want to do under your guidance.
That's what, sir. Let me explain you stepwise, sir. First, you intubate this patient with rigid. That is the safest route. Then once you intubate the rigid, go inside the bronchus. I think it must be in the right main bronchus.
The right main bronchus, of course.
Yes, right main bronchus or bronchus intermedius, probably. So you go to that segment. Then what you do is first you give a adrenaline, diluted adrenaline that will decrease some edema. Along with that, you, prior to taking this patient for procedure, give them a low dose of corticosteroid. That will also help you to subside the edema. Now what you have to do is, bleeding is expected because you are going to touch a granulation tissue. So what you have to do is, you have to take an electrocautery. You have to keep the electrocautery backup ready. Along with that, if you have a cryoprobe, it will be very helpful. So when you put a cryoprobe, it will get adhered to the granulation tissue and you have to remove it. But the problem of removing with the cryo is, there is definitely going to be a bleed because it's a granulation tissue and a vascular tissue. So you have to keep a Fogarty balloon next to it, so that as soon as you remove the granulation tissue with the help of the cryoprobe, you inflate the balloon. So likewise, sequence to attain a local hemostasis. Generally, the hemostasis occurs within 1 to 2 minutes. Then again, you need to keep repeating this procedure as long as you dissect the granulation tissue and reach the foreign body. And once you reach the foreign body, now you have to dislodge this foreign body from the granulation tissue. So you can use the tip of the balloon or you can use your forceps to dislodge this foreign body from the granulation tissue and remove it. But having said that, the problem is this has been there for quite a long period of time. So you, as per your thing, it is almost for 6 years. So probably the viability of the lung is always a question. Even
Yes,
if
sir.
you remove this foreign body, we really don't know whether it will result in a viability of
The
the lung.
foreign
or not.
body, the parents say that it is must be arachinet or I don't know. They are not very clear about that.
So
Whereas
those foreign bodies are generally more difficult because they are organic foreign body. And an
yes,
organic
sir. That
foreign
is why
body,
it is getting granulations.
yeah, the organic foreign body can result in severe inflammation. And the point is, as if it is not causing any symptom and it has become a totally collapsed lung for 6 months, even if you remove the foreign body, there is no guarantee that the lung will be viable. So
Well,
if
we
the,
can. Oh, okay, okay.
because if beyond
So
3 months, the viability of the lung is always a
the
question. So
unviable lung portion can be kept, or will it become a bronchiectasis or something like that?
yes,
Will come.
in
No.
such cases, the better procedure is to take them for a lobectomy or a wedge resection of that particular portion if it is causing a recurrent
We are
pneumonia.
waiting for you. Somebody's you are like experts' opinion whether we have to do a lobectomy or something like that.
So in
Because
case if
the person is
yeah, in case if the foreign body obstruction and the post-obstructive is causing pneumonia, or it is causing structural changes in the lung, or it is causing hemopsis, first attempt a bronchoscopy, but it will be a high-risk procedure. And if you feel that you are able to dissect the granulation tissue and go inside, it's fine. But if you feel that you are not able to do that, then I would say, we would send this patient for a wedge resection or a lobectomy to prevent the future complications.
the another thing you asked me to do the endotracheal tube. We are doing under jet ventilation. Sir, endotracheal tube and bronchoscope, how can it go? There will be no space for that under the vocal cord.
Which
Endotracheal
one,
tube
sir?
goes.
We
Sir,
generally don't use jet ventilation, sir. We use only assisted ventilation. We generally
sir,
don't
assisted
use jet
ventilation is
ventilation.
okay, but we cannot pass an endotracheal tube.
No,
Endotracheal
if it
tube
is
and
not in
bronchoscope,
the
there is no
main
space in the vocal
trachea,
cord. Huh?
no, that's what I'm saying. It depends upon the size of the tube. Even if the size of the foreign body is big, if you can grasp it while removing, we can remove end block with the endotracheal tube.
Sir,
So,
will there be space in the
but it's always advisable to do it under rigid. In case I am saying
rigid
that
only? I am telling about only rigid. With the
yes,
endotracheal tube and the glottis and also the bronchoscopy on the glottis, will there be space? And
no,
4-year-old boy,
we are
5-year-old
putting
boy.
the bronchoscopy through the endotracheal tube, not along the side of the endotracheal tube.
Oh, like that. So endotracheal tube should
So
be 5.
in the place of your rigid tube as a conduit, you can use your endotracheal tube also if it is not in the central airway. But the
Okay.
problem you will face is if the foreign body is bigger than the size of your endotracheal tube, then probably you will not be able to retrieve it through the endotracheal tube.
Yes,
In
sir.
such cases, either you can remove it en bloc, or once you dislodge it, you change it to a rigid intubation and you can do it. Anytime rigid is always better. But if
Yes,
you
sir.
if you don't have a
We don't have
facility, you can.
flexible. We have got only rigid.
And
I don't have
then also
flexible.
it's okay, sir. You can use the rigid forceps to dilate to remove the granulation tissue, but you have to anticipate high chances of bleeding.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. So
Yes,
even after removing that, we have to get a consultation from a pulmonologist whether to remove the affected lung or not.
see that's what many such foreign bodies remain undiagnosed and they just present with localized bronchiectasis because the lung gets destructed, multiple infections will happen. Such lung, even if you remove foreign body, it will not be viable. So the best portion, if there is a structural lung damage associated with a foreign body obstruction, best is to go for surgical resection and remove it totally to prevent future complication.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you. It's very
Yes.
kind of you.
Yeah.
Sir, can I talk? I'm Mr. Durga Prasad from Hyderabad.
Yes, sir.
Can I,
Please,
sir?
please go
Yes,
ahead.
sir.
Now, the so-called, because I have been in this hospital for the past 13 years and we have been bronchoscopy, we have not seen really lung destruction. There had been atelectasis, there had been lung collapse, but they opened up as soon as we removed the foreign body. And of course, maybe the experience might be different in different centers. That's the first thing. The second thing is that one of the questions that they were asking and you were answering, we had a cactus seed sort of thing, which had multiple spines which were impinging onto the trachea, which are penetrating onto the trachea. We removed it, but as soon as we removed it, there was so much of tissue edema that we lost the patient. So it's important that in foreign bodies, where in the trachea or in the bronchus, where there are spines, it's a spinosus foreign body. The better thing is a lobar resection or a segmental resection rather than a rigid bronchoscopy. That is our experience, because we almost do a bronchoscopy every day here, sir, in Government ENT Hospital, Koti, Hyderabad. That's another tip I wanted to give you, because that actually when you have a penetrating foreign body and when you remove it, there is some tissue injury which induces such inflammatory reaction, particularly in children, which will compromise the airway, and before you do a tracheostomy, the patient is gone.
Yeah.
The next thing is that you talked about some previous laryngectomy patient having a tracheal lesion. Now, in these cases, we always tried a long Salpeiger tube or a long indigenously made tubes to make airways. None of them really worked. Now, in many of these lesions that you have described through rigid endoscopy of the malignant lesions and their recurrences and all that, the best option would be to do a tracheal resection. Instead of trying to excise the lesions, go for a tracheal resection, take it off, suture it back, and then subject the patient to radio or chemotherapy which is relevant. That's the important aspect. These endoscopic methods are not going to relieve the patient. Within 15-20 days, the patient is going to come back to you. I have this experience. The other thing that was intriguing to me was when you use a cryotherapy, basically you are freezing the tissue, you are freezing the blood vessels, and then you are talking of bleeding. How these two things go together?
Yeah. Sir, this cryo is what really happens is when we use a cryo, it causes crystallization of the cells. But the problem with cryo is once the cells get crystallized, they become edematous. The cell wall becomes weak and it becomes edematous. In fact, cryo won't cause the constriction of the blood vessels, sir. In fact, it causes more edema and there is a very high risk of bleeding. That is one of the major complications of cryo. Unlike the cautery, when we use a hot therapy, it causes the coagulation of the blood vessels also. But cryo, on the other hand, though it sounds like when we put a cold over a blood vessel, it should shrink. On the contrary, there is a very high risk of bleeding when we use the cryo. That is why even when we use the cryo for other lung biopsies, there is a very high risk of bleeding, and we have witnessed even severe bleeding, but luckily all those bleedings were controlled with just a Fogarty tamponade. So that is how cryo is different from our regular experience, like when a vessel is there, when you put a cold saline, it constricts. But on the contrary, when you use a cryo probe, it causes extensive edema and increased permeability of the blood vessel, that it causes a very high bleeding. So and that is a very, very known complication of cryo. And when we do this cryo ablation also, that particular portion of the tumor becomes edematous. So this is one point, sir. And another thing is regarding this tracheal resection, as you rightly said, even for almost all the adenoid carcinomas, the best modality of the choice would be to do a tracheal resection. But the one case what I showed you where the base of the tumor was arising from the right main bronchus, even the surgeons have denied that they could not achieve the disease-free margin for a tracheal anastomosis or a sleeve endotracheal resection. So that is when we went for this debulking. And the problem is most of these patients come to in an acute setting. And many times the surgical expertise is not immediately available. So these are the two problems which we faced. But having said that, what you said was absolutely right. Like the best modality for any benign lesion would be to do a surgical resection. But for the malignant tumors where the primary modality of the treatment is just going to be palliative, like for the patient who had a partial laryngectomy with a recurrent tumor in the trachea, all the guidelines say that the best modality is just a palliative treatment. So we are doing these debulkings and metallic airway stenting as a means of palliation and not with a curative intent. So in such cases, we do not go. But for an adenoid cystic carcinoma, as you rightly said, the best modality would be a resection and end-to-end anastomosis. So this is what is our experience, sir. And really, thank you for sharing the thought on this spiky foreign bodies, because we have never had an experience to it. So next time when we really see a spiky foreign body, then yes, probably we will also take the consult of the surgeon, sir.
Yes, yes. Then when you are doing at the level of carina and the right main bronchus, when we are thinking in terms of a bimetallic stent, even there a resection can be done. Even if you do a resection there, instead of a net type of stent, you can have a full extent stent there instead of this, because even in malignant lesions, in case, because mostly bronchogenic carcinoma is right now, they are doing some markers, they are doing some genetic analysis, and bronchogenic carcinoma is one of the main cancers where they are doing this analysis and giving radiotherapy and chemotherapy very successfully, really. So in these cases, if you really want to do surgery, when you have a stent, make it a full stent and excise it. So endoscopically removing it is only going to, because what we have observed was that we thought a lesion was benign and we removed it and it came back with vengeance. So one has to be very careful about these lesions. The other thing that is intriguing me is that when you say cryotherapy is going to increase bleeding, why are you choosing it at all?
So this cryo is generally we use mainly for retrieval, sir. Like, because once the tumor, either you can use a rigid forceps to retrieve it, or we use it only as a tool to retrieve. And apart from that, the other utility of the cryo is only to ablate that remnant portions. Apart from that, cryo does not have any role. We don't do the tumor debulking entirely with cryo because there is a very high risk of bleed. So that's why we resort to coring. And the other thing is these metallic stents are also covered metallic stents. These are not, though it looks like net shaped, actually they are covered with a silicone coating. They are hybrid stents. So the ingrowth of the tumor is also less. So we resort this metallic stents only to cases of malignant airway obstruction. We don't put it for any sort of a benign. For benign, still the recommended guidelines are only silicone stents, so that once you are going for a definitive therapy, these are used as a bridge. Once we are going for a definitive therapy, you can remove it. And almost all these patients whoever I have discussed, they all came in like middle of the night or in the evening with a sudden, almost a collapsing stage. So in such cases, it is a call, sir. Like the entire thing is to save the life. That's all. So I would seriously agree to whatever you said with respect to the benign, but I think for malignancy, still the metallic stents can be used as palliative, and that is what all our interventional guidelines are still quoting, sir.
Okay. And in our experience, even when the patient has COPD or has pulmonary metastasis, we did some tracheostomies. They were to reduce the dead space, and the patient was comfortable at least till the time he lasted. So suppose there is a lower respiratory airway obstruction. In your experience and in your, whatever you have gone through, what was the role of tracheostomy? We do a tracheostomy even in those cases.
But only point is, sir, like if it is above the level of your tracheostomy site, then it is going to give you a complete relief. But when it is in the lower airway, there is still a problem that any sort of obstruction of the tracheostomy can take place. So generally in such cases, we go for only debulking and stenting as a palliative measure. We have not tried tracheostomy for a lower airway stenting. This has been just our experience, sir. And most of the like whatever this is a very upcoming field, so we really don't have exactly this is what it is, but they say that any malignant growth at the level of involving the carina, then we go for a metallic Y. But if it involves only the trachea where we can achieve 1 centimeter distance from the carina, we just go for a plain metallic tracheal stent. But we have never tried to put the tracheostomy tube bypassing the tumor at the level of the lower trachea because of the risk. One, it can be obstruction, can be a possibility, and we have really not tried, sir. So I really don't have experience on that front, sir.
Okay. But by being a tertiary center, we keep looking at so many possibilities. That's why I'm mentioning all this for the benefit of all the people who are listening to us. We are all learning together. Nothing like I'm not trying to teach anything. We are all learning together. Only thing, the last question is, one point you mentioned was there was a partial laryngectomy or some sort of surgery that was done at laryngeal level, and then there was a lesion at the tracheal or bronchial level. Am I right?
It's at almost at the mid to lower third of trachea, sir. There was one vascular, both intrinsic and extrinsic component was there.
Yeah, don't you think total laryngectomy would have prevented that?
Sir, that is your ball game, sir. You should give me the clue. Like, I don't know. Maybe yes.
A total
Maybe yes, sir.
laryngectomy.
I seriously don't know whether
would have
that would
prevented
have
it.
changed.
It is a satellite lesion. They have done a partial, the so-called conservative methods, they have done a conservative method and it had produced a satellite lesion. Had they done a total laryngectomy, you would not have had that lesion. And I'm really, I don't know, the learned august audience who are listening to this, and including yourself, should think that there are some British thoracic associations, American thyroid associations and all that, who are advising or advocating conservative surgeries even for thyroid malignancies.
Okay.
If you answer thyroid malignancy, conservative surgery in examinations, at least in Indian setting, you will fail. But they are advocating, that this is a very tricky situation where, a malignancy, it has to be radical. At least I believe that from what I saw from past 30 years, you have to be radical and mutilative in case of malignancy because it's a tissue tendency. It is not a local tendency. It's a tendency of the tissue there. It's going to come back. So this has to be analyzed and we have to publish certain articles to the extent that we should not allow this. What you have mentioned is exactly the consequence of a conservative surgery. This is what exactly I wanted to emphasize here. We have to give up certain fancy tendencies of doing some conservative surgery for a malignancy. It doesn't work. So that's what I wanted to stress. But people like you also should publish articles of this extent where some partial surgery has been done and you have a satellite lesion behind. What is the meaning of this? So this we all have to publish certain articles to prevent this sort of modern, I don't know whether you call it modern or fanciful thinking or whatever it is. We have to do something about this. We have to contribute. That's what I felt when you said about the tracheal lesion.
No, actually, that surgery was done somewhere, sir. They presented to us with this.
Yeah, it is definitely a consequence of so-called conservative surgery, which is absolutely not recommendable.
Hmm. That's true, sir.
That's what I feel. So we have to do something about this, and every person in the August audience, including yourself, kindly take note of this. And it has been a great pleasure, privilege, honor, and such a pleasure to interact with you. A great lecture, great demonstration, and I have been sharing my experience with you. So much of pleasure with you. Thank you very much.
Sir, it's my pleasure, sir, to really learn from you, actually. It was more of a
Thank
learning
you.
than just me giving the lecture. Yeah.
Thank you.
Move on to the questions from the chat section. Is the stenting permanent? If not, when do you remove in the patient?
So there are two things, sir. Like when we do it for a malignancy, as I previously said, it's palliative because most of the loco-regional recurrences, they generally have a very fulminant course. So we will, in such cases also, if the patient has, when we subject these patients to radiotherapy and chemotherapy and they have a very good response, then we'll try to take out the stent within 3 months. But if the patient is not responding, patient overall condition is poor, that they are not able to take a chemotherapy or radiotherapy, then we will tend to leave the stent and keep monitoring the stent for any granulation tissue or other stent related complications. Having said that, any stent is still a foreign body. It has its own set of side effects, like patient can have a granulation tissue, patient can, if they don't take steam nebulizations or they don't maintain the bronchial hygiene properly, they are still at a risk of developing infections. So you need to be very careful, and we may do a serial bronchoscopies at intervals to see if, in case if they produce symptoms, to tide over these complications. So answer is, if it is a malignant, almost most of these patients tend to die off with a stent also in few cases. And if they show very good response to chemo or radiotherapy, we try to remove the stent. But in case of silicone, it is used only as a bridge. For example, when you are putting a silicone stent for a tracheal stenosis or for a post tracheostomy tracheal stenosis, after 2 to 3 months, we are even able to remove the stent. And by the time the tracheal healing has already taken place, and you can avoid these patients from being with that. But having said that, there are few cases where you have done serial dilation and silicone stenting, but these patients have not improved. And if they are really candidates for surgery, then still resection and end-to-end anastomosis is the answer. So silicone stents, most of the silicone stents we remove once the definitive management is taken care of. But for metallic stents, it is more of a palliation.
Yes, sir. I hope that answers the question. We have Dr. Satyakiran, sir. Sir, can you go ahead, sir?
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible, sir.
Firstly, I would like to congratulate Dr. Vishwa. It was an excellent presentation and the case scenarios were very, very great. Okay, I have a question from my side. I have a 1-year-old child who was diagnosed to have anterior glottic web with tracheal stenosis and subglottic stenosis, Cotton-Mayer grade 3. He was diagnosed and tracheostomized elsewhere. So when the child came to me, I did a direct laryngoscopy and bronchoscopy. So it showed the same diagnosis. Now the
I'm not
management
able to
plan.
hear you, sir.
Hello?
Yeah.
Loud, sir.
Okay, can I repeat my question? Should I?
Yeah, only from the after the Cotton-Mayer's classification 3, sir.
Okay. So our plan was to go for an anterior cricoid split at the age of 2 years or plus. So is there any minimal age for tracheal stenting?
Generally, sir, actually speaking, at this, we have not done, personal experience, we have not done any silicone stenting, sir. Most of our silicone stenting we have done only in the adults. So I really don't have an experience to answer your this problem, sir, because we have not seen subglottic stenosis in a 1-year-old kid. I need to review the literature. But physiologically, if there is a silicone stent available also, it will be very risky, sir, because the airways are going to be very narrow and the silicone has its own set of thickness. So even then your airway, achievable airway will be very less. So I don't think it would be an option, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you,
Yes,
Dr. Vishwa.
Then next question by Dr. Mohana. Is post-op airway edema dealt only with steroid use of single day when bronchoscopy is done? And will the stents retain their position given the edema?
No, we don't stent for post-operative airway edema, sir. Until and unless there is a mechanical cause for an obstruction, there is no point of stenting. So generally the post-op edema is just because the patient is having a reflex laryngospasm, or there is a traumatic intubation, or some edema at the level of the vocal cord. So generally most of these edema resolve until and unless there is a physical damage to the structure. So just giving them short courses of steroids along with we do nebulization with epinephrine also, not through the endotracheal tube. Actually, you need to put the over the mask so that you want to cover the part above your, at the level of the glottis. So nebulization with epinephrine, these, most of our cases of edema have resolved. We have never stented an airway for the sake of a laryngospasm or for a laryngeal edema. So we don't do it.
Dr. Mohana, can you unmute? Probably, I think I've not read out her query.
Good evening,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah.
Good evening, sir. Sir, the problem is when you, in the case presentation, you had shown that there's a coring with bronchoscopy done. In such cases, when you do post-op stenting and you've discharged the patient next day, how was that edema dealt with? That is what was my question.
Yeah, okay, ma'am. Generally, those edemas are not significant, ma'am. The beauty of the airway is when we do the procedure and leave it, we feel that the airway looks so vascular, so edematous, and with lot of debris. But the next day, when you do a check bronchoscopy, almost everything is totally gone. That's the beauty of the lower airway. Like generally, we just put them on a very low dose of steroids. We give them adequate bronchodilation with Sama combination, and along with that we just give a 1 or 2 days of IV antibiotics followed by that oral antibiotics in case if we are suspecting infection. Most of the cases do not develop that significant airway edema which we are seeing. That's what has been the experience, because most of our patients generally go back the next day walking and they don't complain of any airway edema problems. The only problem that might occur is when you are keeping the rigid bronchoscopy for a very long period of time, because these procedures take time. Like these procedures take almost 1 to 1.5 hours. Whatever I have put it is in a very concise form. In such cases, when your rigid bronchoscopy is there at the vocal cord for such long period of time, you will be able, you would have stented, but when you remove the rigid bronchoscope, they can have some edema at the level of the glottis because of the rigid bronchoscopy being there for a long period of time. In such cases, probably we delay the intubation for almost around 4 hours. And after that, once the cuff leak, everything is there, we remove the patient from intubation. So the airway edema because of stenting or because of coring is not that significant. And once you stent, anyway, it is going to maintain the luminal diameter. Even if edema is there, it will not cause any harm.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, another question, sir. When there is a foreign body with 2 sharp ends and a single end is like penetrating into the mucosa or the airway, sir, how do you deal with such foreign bodies? Like you
So
cannot.
generally those are, yeah. Generally, those are very tricky, ma'am. The first thing, because the problem is when you try to remove it, you may injure the other part also. Like when you take it out, you will injure the other wall also. So what you uses there are some forceps which has got a rubber tips. So these are rubber tip forceps are very good at holding these sharp foreign bodies. So you hold one end of the sharpness with the help of a rubber tip, and then you remove and you maintain the. While pulling out also, you need to maintain the axis of the airway. It should not be perpendicular to the axis of the airway. You need to maintain along the axis of the airway and pull it out. So you need to be it's a matter of dexterity. Like once you maintain it along the airway, it doesn't cause much harm. But if you try to pull it, probably you will injure. Again, it will go and get stuck to the other wall and it will cause more edema. So you need to hold it at the sharp end of the tip. If at all you have a rubber forceps, it's very good. And then you can slowly remove it.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. And that's all from the question and answer session. We really appreciate you for taking your valuable time and coming on our platform, presenting very interesting cases. And I hope all the postgraduates who have logged in had a very good take-home messages. Thank you once again, sir. And we'll be hopefully planning some more interesting sessions in the future. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you for having a great day. Wish you all a
Yeah.
happy weekend. Thank you all.
Happy Friendship Day and happy weekend. And thank you all for calling me to be a part of this week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.